Hey everybody, here we are at Red Rocks Racing Sportsbook. It's Jason, I'm Chucky. We're back for the New Year's special of the Sports Betting Podcast Bookends. Before we kind of jump into everything, just want to hope that everybody had a great Christmas and nice holidays, got to spend some time with your family. We know it's New Year, so Happy New Year. And we're going to get started, Jay. I mean, it was a kind of a fun Christmas with games being played on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. We saw some of the same, some big comebacks, some big upsets, some ugly football from some of these teams. We know it's such a quarterback-driven league that it's going to be interesting these last couple of weeks what teams do, because 19 of the teams in the NFL right now really are going to be looking for a new quarterback next year. And, I'm not sure where they start exactly, but it's going to be fun.
Yeah, not only talking about next year, but I mean, we've got intentionally the whole NFL league with a chance to make the playoffs. I mean, these playoff races,
not if you're a Bears fan,
with all the losses
right.
that happened last week, even the Packers have found a way back in. We've got some battles in the NFC and AFC South for who's going to get in there, let alone as we approach New Year's Eve here, we've got the college football playoff. We've got a number of bowl games going on, and we've been talking about the good and the bad of these bowl
right.
games. But as we get to these New Year's Day and January 2nd bowl games, some really good games on tap, and hopefully the players that are scheduled to play in these games
right.
come to play.
I think when you look at the NFL too, and you look at the quarterback situation, and kind of touching on how many teams need a quarterback, that some of these teams are struggling with their number ones, but when you get to number twos or number threes, saw Nick Foles, he did win a Super Bowl and had a great run with the Eagles there, but just wasn't prepared on that game against the Chargers. Trace McSorley, he targeted Hopkins 10 times. He had one completion. Just naming a few guys right now. Maybe it's not fair to those guys who didn't get reps throughout the course of the season, but there really is a drop-off. And we see it in the point spread from 1 to 2, and then from 2 to 3, it is really dramatic.
Well, and it goes along with where the other players in the team and the coaching schemes, because you talk about as much as the young guys and guys that haven't gotten reps not having success, you could say the complete opposite for what's going on in San Francisco
right.
with Brock Purdy,
yep.
in
right.
that Trey Lance goes down, Jimmy G goes down, Brock Purdy's third on the depth chart, and he's finding all kinds of success. He's finding George Kittle and rejuvenating his tight end success. So again, we're talking about teams that are struggling versus teams that are sitting at the top of the conference, but Brock Purdy in that third quarterback role has been able to find success, and I think that's going to be something that we're going to be talking about for years to come as we see the concussion issues
right.
and quarterbacks being knocked out of games, and what's going on with quarterbacks finding themselves that we're down to second and third string quarterbacks for a lot of the teams in the league.
Don't you think some of it is like scheme driven though? If you look at San Francisco, we know that Garoppolo has a phenomenal win-loss record as quarterback of the 49ers, but he's never really been asked to win the game. I'm not saying that a quarterback isn't always going to win the game, but he's asked to more manage the game. They've had a good running game while he's been there, a great defense, good skill position players, and that's what Purdy's been able to do, is kind of just manage the game right now, kind of for a young quarterback like Jimmy Garoppolo did. Trey Lance, I think you tailor-made the game a little bit differently because of his running ability. Zach Wilson with the Jets has been a colossal miss so far at this point, but I think in the Niners case, it's more, kind of game management and system-esque. And I think he's fitting that system really well. Yeah,
and he's not one of those guys that's really running the football, or they're looking
right.
for him to run the football. And we talk about today's dynamic quarterbacks, the guys that are at the top of the league in the MVP races, in Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, and even going down to Lamar Jackson and Justin Fields.
Even Justin Fields,
all of
right.
these guys have the ability to run,
right.
And that's what's making them successful and giving the kind of the dual set offense. So the Niners are doing it kind of the opposite way of that everybody else is doing it.
Right. So before we get into this week's pro football schedule, we're going to talk a little college football. And Jay touched on it, that I love college football and I love bowl season, but just hasn't been the same. We've seen, so many schools right now where there's kids that are in the transfer portal. They've opted out for the NFL draft. Even watching some of these games, you talk about it's not the same school or the same team that you've seen play during the course of the regular season. You see quarterbacks are like, oh yeah, he's been in 3 games in his entire career. He's trying to maybe, get the job for next year. It's just not the same right now. But I think the games that we're going to touch on today are going to be the same, and these are by far, I think, the marquee matchups that we're going to see in college football for the bowl season.
And from a sportsbook standpoint, a college football fan standpoint, hoping that the going to the 12-team playoff rejuvenates what this bowl season is.
Right.
Even as you watch these games on television,
right.
they're in front of empty stadiums. I mean, it's like friends and family only. There's not a lot of team travel or fan bases traveling down to these games. And as we look to these New Year's Day games, hopefully we'll flip the script a little bit with the Rose Bowl and the playoff games. And, obviously some of these games, Mississippi State versus Illinois, will have the Mike Leach, USC versus Tulane. There's a lot of good games out there. But, again, the question is who's playing and who's not.
So we're going to look at one game, although it's Clemson and Tennessee, which is a marquee game, and we know how good these two schools have been and how many kids that they're putting into the next level. Unfortunately, there is a lot of guys missing in this game. We've seen the number drop a little bit from 7 to 5 right now. Ticket counts, 62% of the tickets are on Tennessee here. This game's on the 30th. Kind of anxious to see the way both these teams kind of play right now. It's clearly not the same Tennessee team that we saw earlier in the season beat Alabama.
Yeah, Tennessee ranked number 1 at one point in time during the year, the big win over Alabama. It was all Hendon Hooker, the quarterback, to Jalen Hyatt, the great wide receiver. We're not going to see both of those two guys in this game. Joe Milton's been a fill-in the last 2 games. He's quarterbacked them before Hooker came on board. He is formidable. But again, Tennessee missing some big parts on that offense. Clemson, not like Dabo Sweeney to have a lot of opt-outs in this game. Normally they're looking to play in a national championship type environment. DJ Ukulele puts himself in the transfer portal, but we're not really seeing a drop-off at the quarterback position for Clemson. Cade Klubnik is going to take over. He's been a part of their offense all season long, coming in when DJ would struggle.
They do have some of their stud defenders there that have opted out. And
that's why I think you've seen that line come down. But to me, this is a game that I think Clemson wants to put on an offensive show and showcase Klubnik, and I won't be surprised at all if Milton and Klubnik kind of trade paint and ride these teams up and down the field.
It's a shame that you're not seeing them both at kind of full throttle, because both teams had their moments during the course of the year. But Tennessee, I think, really was one of the bigger surprises when they were healthy of what they were able to accomplish this year.
You can arguably say in the middle of the season they were the best team in the country, the way they were playing, and then unfortunately the injury bug struck them right before the having to play Georgia and kind of downhill from there, to suffering the loss to South Carolina. But losing Hendon Hooker, obviously that was the big deal in their season.
I think that the big question for me is going to be which orange will be more prevalent in the crowd, Clemson orange or Tennessee orange. So we'll see how that game all plays out. So now on New Year's Day or New Year's Eve, before we get to the 2 playoff games, Alabama and Kansas State, there was a little worry that, Young and Anderson and a host of other players wouldn't play for Alabama. I mean, Anderson and Young are projected 1-2 in the draft right now if it's Texans and Bears, the way it kind of looks. Of course, these teams could trade out and other teams could trade up, but they are the consensus number 1 offensive and number 1 defensive players on almost everybody's big board right now. We thought they'd opt out. When it was announced they were going to play, that number started to creep back up. Nobody has played kind of better than Kansas State down the stretch with their win against TCU. Kind of a fun game, I think, to kick it off on New Year's Eve. Right now, though, almost 80% of the tickets are on Alabama.
Yeah, and you talked about it when this line in this bowl was announced. Alabama opened up an 8.5-point favorite. We saw that line go all the way down to 3 with the expectation that we weren't going to see Young, we weren't going to see Anderson, we weren't going to see these guys that were draft eligible for the Alabama come in this game. And all the reports are that these guys are going to play. They're excited about playing. They're pushing that Alabama team first, team before I. I'll be surprised. Personally, as I look at this game, I really think that Nick Saban kind of steps in. He allows Young to play. He allows Anderson to play. But I don't think that they finish the end of the first half. I think that they get pulled to put in some of the younger guys, as Saban has respect for these guys and they're draft eligible and doesn't want to see them get injured at all. So just something to look out for. Alabama saying all the right things.
Especially if they have kind of a big lead, you might see that happen.
That they potentially come out of the game. And Kansas State, this is a Big 12 team that has a chance to go knock off an all-world Alabama team, solidify recruiting and everything that they want to do there to get Alabama in this game it would be a big feather in the cap. Obviously, you talked about the big win over TCU in the Big 12 championship game, but this is a game where, K-State. Now, when we talk about TCU, I expect them to pull out all the stops to go back to a dozen years ago when Boise State was able to knock off Oklahoma, and we saw fake punts and fake field goals and Hail Mary, Statue of Liberty, Fumble Rooski. I mean, you might see everything that you could possibly see from a trick play standpoint out of K-State. And then as we go into the TCU Michigan, I really expect Sonny Dykes and TCU to have some of that same MO of looking for double, triple, reverse, Philly special, all the fake trick plays that you can imagine. I'm expecting out of these underdog teams.
Do you think with the portal at all now that I know there's just been some rumors out there, and I haven't really given them much thought, but that guys like Saban and stuff would entertain even going back to the NFL because of the portal. That you work so hard to recruit a kid, he doesn't get as much playing time maybe in his freshman year, or he's redshirted, and then he looks to transfer. I mean, it really has changed the entire landscape of college football, even from our end. When we look to put up futures for the following year and look to put things up, for conferences, I mean, it has changed so dramatically. I'm not sure if it's good or bad, to be perfectly honest.
I think it's bad for your mid-major teams in holding players, and I think to the exact opposite of your point, I think it's great for the Alabamas and the Clemsons because they can go now get guys that have
they're going to be the recipient.
They're
going to
be able to
kids
recruit.
Too. Right.
Well, they're going to recruit. They're going to lose kids that didn't end up getting the playing time.
Right.
And then they have to fill them. So you're not leaving Alabama if you're playing. You're leaving Alabama if you're not playing.
If you're not playing,
and
correct.
then it's opening up a guy that maybe was playing at a smaller school to go and play big time college football. And so I think if anything, and at the end of the day, the nil is also about the money and which schools have the money to go get these guys. And the Texases and the Georgias, and they've got the big bankrolls to be able to recruit these players that want to play there.
There's a lot more cha-chinging that we're hearing, I think, in college football right now. All right, so now let's talk about the two big games, the two playoff games, which I think everybody's kind of talking about. Where do you want to start? You want to start TCU, Michigan? Michigan, numbers come down just a little bit. Michigan a little bit over a touchdown favorite. 68% of the tickets are on the Wolverines in this game against TCU. 64% of the tickets are on the over. And as you kind of alluded to earlier with, TCU and all the stops, I know they're making a new Mad Max movie, but, I mean, this is Mad Max's game. This is Mad Max Duggan's game right here, is what can he do to kind of shine. He's already declared that he's coming out. So this is his last game at TCU. What's he going to do? What can that offense do with Sonny Dykes to kind of combat what the Wolverines have in Jim Harbaugh?
Yeah, and you talk about Max Duggan, and obviously a guy that was benched early in the season, wasn't their starting quarterback, who finds himself as a Heisman finalist in New York. This is, I keep saying this is TCU's Super Bowl no matter what happens in this game. Obviously, if they find themselves in the national championship, it's an absolutely incredible
No one thought
story.
they'd be here.
To be sitting here following the loss to Kansas State, not getting leapfrogged by the Alabama or somebody else, coming up and stealing that spot for them. They're getting the respect here, and to be able to play a Michigan team that, again, dominated the Big Ten and obviously had the big win over Ohio State.
That of all the four teams that TCU really could come into this game as the loosest?
Yeah, and that's why I said I expect them to pull out. There's no reason for them to be tight. There's no reason for them to be worried about going for it on the 4th and 1 at their own 40. I mean, they have literally got to pull out all the stops and try and shock the world here and shock the Wolverines. And Harbaugh will have the eyes ready. I don't know that they do have the offensive line. They do have McCarthy playing well. They were able to have the big plays down the field against Ohio State. And they run the football exceptionally well. And if they're able to run the football on here on TCU with the defense that they have, it could spell trouble for TCU if Michigan is just able to run it down their throats. But I just really get a feeling here that we're going to see TCU with everything that you can possibly imagine thrown here at the Michigan Wolverines and see if the Michigan Wolverines can hold on.
I really think if you're Michigan, 2 years ago, there was a lot of rumblings that Harbaugh was done. He couldn't beat the Ohio States of the world. He couldn't beat, the big schools. Now he's got a legitimate chance to win the national championship. We look at what the number is for Ohio State and Georgia. Michigan wins this game convincingly. It's going to be a very small number for the national championship game. So I think there's a lot of pressure on Michigan and Jim Harbaugh here to get it done here impressively and then have a shot to beat the winner of Georgia-Ohio State for the national championship.
Yeah, and the other thing in this game is the total, sitting right around 6. Actually, both semifinal games are sitting around in that 60 number. I do think that's a total that could go over here really quickly. Do have some dynamic playmakers on the TCU side of the ball. Obviously going up against a Michigan defense, nothing like what they've seen in the Big 12. But if this game starts to be where Michigan is able to run the football on TCU, and like I said, I think that we see things open up. And if TCU has to start going for short yardage on their own side of the field, could open up the game up, or we could be in a chase mode type of game where Michigan gets up big and TCU is trying to come back. And so I think that total, we could see that total go over that total pretty easy.
So now the other game, Ohio State, Georgia. Ohio State definitely needed some help toward the end of the season with Southern Cal getting beat to get in. They have the loss against Michigan already. You guys are clearly backing Georgia way more than you're backing Michigan right now, because over 75% of the tickets are on the Bulldogs. They're a tad under a touchdown favorite. We've talked about it over the last kind of 48 hours. Is this game going to be pushed to 7? If it does, is it an automatic take? Is there just too much value there to get Ohio State, with a full month to prepare, getting a touchdown? But a lot of the ticket count right now really does favor the Bulldogs here. We know how good their defense is. They're looking to repeat as national champions. What do you think of this game?
Well, I mean, since October 1st, Georgia went into Missouri and won 26-22. Since that time frame, they have not played essentially a close game. They've beaten every opponent that they played by 10 or more. They had a thumping of number 1 Tennessee at the time when Tennessee was number 1, 27-13, and then they blow out LSU, who was playing some pretty solid football, 50-30 in a game that they were up 35-10 at the half. So it wasn't really that close. Stetson Bennett's been absolutely fantastic. I mean, we talk about, what is it, his 9th or 10th year in college football. I'm teasing, but he's 25 years old and he just does everything that they need to do right. Brock Bowers, the tight end, is a story. He's going to be a top draft pick, and Jalen Carter on the defensive side of things is just an absolutely causes havoc on that defensive front. And so Georgia is in this position and 13-0 because of the team that they have. They've scored 509 points and only allowed 166. That's a 39-point average and essentially 13 points against, a 26 average margin of victory of 26 points against their opponents. They did play a soft SEC East schedule. I mean, so we are talking about the Vanderbilts, Missouri, Kentucky. They had a South Carolina and a Tennessee thrown in there, who both kind of Tennessee was hot early and South Carolina was hot late. So it's not like you can get a really good picture of them having to beat up a really tough SEC schedule, but they've got all the components there to go and win another national championship.
I think you touched on something that was really interesting, and that's the age of Bennett being 25. That's almost the norm now for a lot of these kids. Hooker is 25.
Well, COVID has done that a lot too.
Will Levis is 24. So you're seeing a lot of these kids who have had a little bit more time at the collegiate level, time to mature. Now that's going to benefit them a lot at the collegiate level, I think, when they get to these bowl games and with the expanded playoffs that we're going to see in a few years. But you wonder what happens at the next level, though. Does the NFL shy away from a guy who's already 25 opposed to a kid that's 20 or 21? I think it's kind of an interesting dynamic overall.
The big thing for me in this game, and I think that why we're seeing so much money on Georgia, is the game's in Atlanta. And this is, normally these semifinals are played on neutral sites, and this is not going to be a neutral site by any dynamic. This is going
Ohio
to be
State, the Buckeye fans do travel well,
This is going to be a pro Georgia stadium and fan base. No matter how many people from Ohio State travel down there, the stadium's going to be roaring for Georgia. On the flip side, Ohio State, we talk about dominance, and Ohio State, 22-point loss to Michigan in the last game of their season. They were 534 points scored to 231 points allowed, averaging 44.5 points a game, only allowing 19. That's a 25-point margin of victory, and that's after suffering the 22-point loss to Michigan. So they were a dominant team, blowing teams out in the Big Ten week after week, and then just kind of the Michigan, they got bit by the big play bug, and McCarthy hit these big over-the-top pass plays. So I don't know what Ryan Day and C.J. Stroud have in store for Georgia. I mean, we've got a little bit of an injury bug with some guys potentially not playing. Henderson, the dynamic running back they've had all year, most likely not going to play. This is yet going to have to be a Marvin Harrison Jr., C.J. Stroud dynamic offense, getting big plays down the field. If they can hold up on the offensive line and not let that defensive front get to C.J. Stroud early, there is a chance Ohio State can stay in this game. And again, we see maybe potentially points going up and down
Stroud's
the board.
the key. I agree with you. I think if Stroud can have a good game here, I think it really makes it an interesting game.
A lot of people say that it's on Ohio State's defense to keep them in the game. As much as Ohio State's defense can keep them in the game, they are going to have to score points on the offensive side of the football because Ohio State can't stop Georgia. Georgia has too many guys. They're too big and strong. They're going to score. Ohio State's going to have to match them point for point.
So we spent a little bit more time on college football this week, guys, especially the two playoff games. And we know everyone's going to be busy as we get closer and closer to the New Year celebration. But this is such a great time to have the app on STN Sports. Full slate of NFL games on New Year's Day. You've got the college games, the playoff games on New Year's Eve. We love when you guys come out and enjoy everything we have to offer to all of our properties, not just here at Red Rock. And we'll touch on it a number of times through our segments of Bookends. But if you don't have the app and STN Sports, come on in today, get signed up. It takes a matter of minutes. And while you're enjoying all the kind of festivities going on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, you've got the sportsbook at the palm of your hand.
Yeah, and lots of props on both the playoff games on the 31st, including player props, passing yardage, rushing yardage, touchdown props. A lot of stuff to look for in those two games. And again, we're not even getting into talking about all the games that are on the second, the Rose Bowl, USC versus Tulane, as I talked about, Illinois, Mississippi State. There are some other really, really good games that are going on here. It's just too long to dive into each one. But they should be some good games where we do see these guys playing in these games, trying to get a win.
I'm really looking forward to these two playoff games, guys, on New Year's Eve. So that kind of concludes the college segment of this week's Bookends. We're going to jump right back into it and talk pros. So just stay tuned. We'll be back in a minute.
It's football season, baby. And you know what that means. It's time to bet your buns off. And when it comes to sports betting, you better bet with the STN Sports App. So what in the heck are you waiting for? Download the STN Sports App today and trust the local favorite.
Hey everybody, we're back here at Red Rock's Racing Sportsbook for the Sports Betting Podcast Bookends. And Jay, we're going to dive right into pro football now. It's week 17. A lot of teams jockeying for playoff position. And Thursday night, the Cowboys come off that big win against the Eagles. But really quickly on that, Eagles beat the Cowboys earlier in the season. It was Jalen Hurts versus Cooper Rush. Cowboys beat the Eagles late in the season. It was Dak Prescott versus Gardner Minshew. So neither team we haven't seen Dak against Hurts yet, which we could see at some point in the playoffs. But it was really a big win for Dallas to keep that overall number one seed or winning the NFC East alive. Dallas plays on Thursday Night Football against the Titans in a game that, as strange as it may sound, means nothing to the Titans this week, but week 18 will mean something to them when they play at Jacksonville to win the AFC South. Number has started to creep up here. It's past 10 right now. It's going to 11. It looks like it could even go higher. We don't know if Derrick Henry will play. It looks like it's going to be Malik Willis at quarterback. This Cowboy team is so good defensively against a young kind of quarterback like that, and maybe Tennessee resting a lot of guys. I think this number's even going to go higher. Ticket count right now really favors the Cowboys with about 60% on the Cowboys against the Titans on Thursday night.
Yeah, and this is the key when we talk about week 17 and week 18 and games that you're betting and games that we're booking is knowing the scenarios.
Right.
And as we roll through this week's schedule and next week's schedule, it gets even worse on who's playing and who's not playing. And obviously the Jacksonville, Tennessee scenario of they can win that AFC South next week. Neither of their games this week mean anything to them as far as winning that. Jacksonville, on the flip side of that, we expect them to playing the Texans. They've been on a roll. Trevor Lawrence continuing to get better and better each week. Tennessee has not. They've actually lost 5 in a row. They've really been on the downward trend. Obviously, Tannehill being out, Willis just hasn't been able to get anything going. They've got a couple receivers banged up.
What really hurts them this week, too, is that it's a short week.
Yep.
I mean, you're playing now. You've lost 5 in a row. You're really struggling. Henry missed practice, I think it was on Monday, was back on Tuesday. But if you're a little bit banged up in a meaningless game and you only have a really short week to prepare, why would you play these guys?
Yeah, and it's tough to want to back them from a better standpoint if you don't believe Derrick Henry's going to play, as he's been their catalyst in their offense, and the way that they go ahead and beat teams is when he can rumble and stumble and have these big games and keep that other team's offense off the field. If that's not there for them, that you really question what Tennessee's going to be able to do in this football game.
So again, I do think this number's probably going to go up. It's the Thursday night game.
And on the flip side of it, Dallas does want to continue winning. Obviously, they're in that 5 hole. Can't really go up any further unless for some reason the Eagles were to lose this game and then potentially lose a Week 18 game, then Dallas can find themselves, in a better spot. But for right now, they're locked in the 5, but they do want to keep winning.
Right. I know there's a lot of kind of chatter out there that Hurts could play this week for the Eagles. I truly believe he will not play this week, that it will be Minshew again. We'll see what happens against the Saints in that game. Eagles and Saints made a trade last year that let the Saints move up to draft Chris Olave, which gives the Eagles their number 1 pick this year. So an Eagle win, not only do they solidify the number 1 seed, but they also get a better first-round draft pick as well. Let's look at the Panthers and Bucks now. Big game in the NFC South. Both teams below 500. I don't know how the Bucks continue to find ways to win, but they do. On the flip side, Carolina kind of controls their own destiny if they can win here and win week 18. So a couple of interesting trends here. First, the Bucks are a 3-point favorite, yet 55% of the tickets are on the Panthers getting points here. Carolina is 5-1 against the number, their last 6. Tampa's 4-1 against the number, their last 5 against Carolina. I've really been impressed with the job that Steve Wilkes has done since he took over for Carolina. If they don't lay that egg a few weeks ago against the Steelers, they are right there. They're tied with Tampa right now, and they're in the thick of it. Now they kind of have to win out. They have to win this road game in Tampa. But I think Carolina's been kind of a big surprise since they made that coaching change of Matt Rule and since the trade of Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, and they've been doing it with their run game. Foreman and Hubbard and Blackshear, they're just running the ball exceptionally well. It's almost like the script is written, though, as we've watched this Tampa team the last couple of weeks. It wasn't that they beat the Saints. It was that the Saints fell apart in that game and allowed Tampa to go win it. Last week we watched Arizona have a 10-point lead late and then just find a way to fall apart and allow the Tampa Bay Bucks to go steal a game. And so we've talked about somebody's got to win this NFC South, and Carolina controlled their destiny, had the unfortunate loss to the Steelers as a home favorite. They were able to rebound with a big win over Detroit. But Carolina, for some reason, they feel like they have this moxie against the Bucks. Like they just match up well. So I think this is going to be a kind of smack them in the mouth, low scoring game, as all the Bucks games have been for the last several weeks. Very low scoring games, grind them out. Who can hit their field goals and who can, unfortunately, not commit the big turnover or the big mistake to allow the other team to steal the game.
Yeah, I really like the way Carolina's played. I mean, they've really kind of circled the wagons a little bit. They should be loose in this game as well. But you're right, that running game has been key with Foreman and Chuba Hubbard. Another game we're going to jump at and look at now, a big NFC North game or AFC North game. Steelers-Ravens. There's a chance that Lamar Jackson could be back here. Ravens are a small favorite. Ticket count really favors the Steelers. Steelers are 1 game below 500 now. If they could somehow win their last 2 games, they can still get above that 500 and keep Mike Tomlin's streak alive. Steelers are 4-1 against the spread their last 5. Baltimore is 5-0 straight up their last 5 at home, and 5 straight home unders. So you think about Baltimore without Lamar Jackson, and there's a chance he could be back. Check the injury reports this week. I think if he's back, that number does creep up a little bit. But they have been unimpressive offensively. I think this past weekend was the first time that a wide receiver had caught a touchdown pass for the Ravens since week 3, which is really hard to believe that their offense has been that bad so far. Small favorite. I think they still want to kind of right the ship, because if they can win here and Cincinnati loses on Monday night against Buffalo, they can still go into the top spot and win that division. So a much bigger game, I think, for Baltimore, although Pittsburgh does still have some playoff hopes alive as a wild card team.
Yeah, and this game flexed to the Sunday night game, and you talk about their struggles on offense. They did get J.K. Dobbins back. I think they ran for over 180 yards rushing against the Falcons last week. A big game on the ground. But both of these teams really struggled to score.
Right.
Steelers were able to secure a 13-10 victory at home over the Raiders last Sunday night in what was the emotional Franco Harris game that we talked about. But really, it was a lot of ugly on the offensive side of the football. The Ravens won in Pittsburgh 16-14, I think, just 2 weeks ago. So these teams are vastly familiar of what they're going to throw back and forth at each other. Lamar Jackson, obviously, if he was to play, would add a whole different dynamic to this game. But again, we talked about Carolina and Tampa just being put the ball down and let's try and see if we can run through each other. I expect that's what we're going to see a lot in this game of field position. See where we
offense,
can try and run the ball, and it may come down to field goal kickers. And unfortunately for the Steelers, they were lucky to get out of that game with the Raiders, as they missed two field goals in that one against the Raiders.
It is hard to believe that they still mathematically have a shot to be a wild card team. So AFC South game, I know we touched on it a little bit earlier when we talked about the Titans, and that's the Texans and Jags. And I've been so impressed with the way the Jags have played. Trevor Lawrence has looked great. You talk their young receivers, if it's Zay Jones, if it's Christian Kirk, Etienne out of the backfield, they really have played good. Doug Peterson has really kind of helped that team kind of grow. Don't forget, next year they're going to add Calvin Ridley, who they made that trade for. So they've really put Trevor Lawrence in a good position by surrounding him with good skill position players. But there are a couple of interesting trends here. Houston is 5-0 straight up their last 5 when playing Jacksonville. They're getting points here. They're also 7-1 straight up in their last 8 home games against Jacksonville. So they've kind of owned the Jags a bit of late, yet the Jags are playing so well, the Texans aren't. And there's one little asterisk out there for the Texans. With their win last week and the Bears' loss, they only have a 1-game lead right now for the first overall pick in the draft. Now, if the Texans lose 1 game and the Bears lose 2, they both finish the season with identical records. But due to the tiebreakers, the Chicago Bears would have the number 1 pick, not the Texans. So just something to think about there. Number has creeped up a little bit because Doug Peterson said this morning that he expects to play all his guys. I don't rest my guys. I play to win. And I really kind of believe him in this spot. I know the Titans on the short work week, they're going to rest guys. I think Jacksonville's playing so good right now, you don't want to stop that momentum train. You want to go into that game, week 18. You don't care what the Titans do this week. You want to go with another win, look impressive, and then hopefully you can take care of business at home, week 18, make the playoffs, and win the AFC South.
Yeah, Jacksonville's been the hottest team in that division, winning 3 straight. You talked about that they're now like a 5-point favorite against Houston. They want to win this game and then go ahead and beat Tennessee and find themselves securing a divisional championship. We talked about how Houston still has the number 1 pick, but this team's really played good the last 3 weeks. They almost beat Dallas in Dallas. They played a really tough game against Kansas City, and then go to Tennessee and beat Tennessee last week. Obviously, they've been down, but Houston has been fighting. It hasn't been like this team has quit.
Being a Bears fan, I sure hope they continue that and they win a game.
Yeah, if they find a way to win a game, and I don't think that there's a clamoring in Houston, or I wouldn't expect there to be hey, we're supposed to lose this game so that we can hold on to the number 1 pick. I don't think you can go into the locker room and tell those guys, you can't win because we want to get the number 1 pick. So I think this Houston team keeps fighting, and Dameon Pierce and these guys, they're grinding it out. Their season's been done for a long, long time, but their last 3 weeks show that they're playing hard-nosed football.
I think it's interesting, too, because if they do lose the number 1 pick, the one thing they don't have to worry about is the Bears taking a quarterback at number 1. Now, granted, the Bears would probably trade out of that pick, and there's some thought that the Bears and Texans could actually swap positions then, and they just give the Bears some extra draft picks or some players that would kind of incentivize that a little bit. So I don't think it's catastrophic either way. They're still going to be in a spot to get one of the top 3 quarterbacks at number 2 if it falls that way. And getting back to Jacksonville, 2 years ago, they have the number 1 pick, they picked Trevor Lawrence. Last year, they had the number 1 pick, they picked Walker. How many teams have had back-to-back number 1 picks that the third year they actually won their division? I'd have to look it up and see, but I don't think there's been a whole lot.
No, but you talk about that division itself. I know we're going to get to it later between the AFC South and the NFC South. Those opportunities were there. We're seeing just a downfall. It's kind of a downfall. The Colts and Titans expected to be at the top of that division, and just a kind of an utter failure for both those franchises this year.
So we're going to jump from the AFC to the NFC now. NFC North. The Bears, the Lions. 2 teams heading in opposite directions. As Jay alluded to earlier, the Bears on an 8-game losing streak. Lions, tough loss last week against Carolina. They're still hoping to sneak into the playoffs. They've only had really 2 losses in the last month and a half against Buffalo on Thanksgiving, that 3-point loss, but really kind of laid an egg against Carolina this past week. Game was outside. But a couple of interesting trends here. First, you guys are backing the Lions big time. 72% of the tickets are on the Lions. Lions are 7-1 against the number their last 8. They're 10-2 against the number their last 12 home games. And if you like scoring, maybe this is the game, because the Bears 5 for 5, their last 5 road games have all gone sailing over. This is a must-win for Detroit in this game.
Yeah, there's a must-win game, and then they have to travel to Green Bay next week to have any chance of getting into the playoffs. You talked about the over.
Somehow that's going to be the flex game on Week 18.
One of the highest scoring game, highest totals this week. Statistically speaking, these are the 2 worst defenses in the NFL from a points allowed standpoint, both allowing north of 26 points a game. So that's why you see that number so high and up and down the field. And we'll see, the Bears have lost 8 in a row. They're outside the Niners, who have won 8 in a row. They have the longest losing streak in the NFL, and that's why they're putting themselves in that position to get the number one pick.
But you know what? You talked about the Texans, how many games they've been in. I know the Bears ended up getting kind of blown out against the Bills last week, but they've kind of had the same MO. They've been in all these games. I mean, they've really hung around. We know their defense is depleted. We know, they made some big trades. They've acquired a bunch of draft capital. They've got more cap space than any team in the league right now. But I think they've played well, even during this 8-game losing streak. They've been in so many games.
Yeah, if you're, as a Bear fan and watching them play, you're somewhat excited to see the development of Justin Fields and him getting better and better, and that they're competitive in these games and that they're losing at the end, because then they can get a higher draft pick. To me, Justin Fields was dynamic when he's running the ball, finding a way to get 10 to 12 to 15 carries, some of them designed runs, just not total scrambles, and that seemed to kind of go away last week against the Bills. Don't know if they just didn't want to put the injury or if it was the really cold weather that was in Chicago, but he kind of turned off the running game. I think he only had 7 carries, and I think those were all kind of scrambles. I don't know if any of those were designed runs. If they're going to go and beat Detroit this week, he's got to get back to the Justin Fields who played when they lost to Detroit. I think he had 2 rushing touchdowns and over 160 yards rushing in that game, as well as 2 passing touchdowns. So for them to hang in that game and cover against Detroit or go beat Detroit, we're going to have to see the Justin Fields that gets those 15 rushing opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, he's so good. I mean, you look at when he turns on the Jets, he has definitely had some highlight reel plays so far this year. Now we're going to jump back to the AFC East. Patriots, Dolphins. Dolphins have lost 4 straight after they were ahead in that division. Actually, before this 4-game losing streak, they were actually on top of the Bills in the AFC East. That has really gone by the wayside. They've lost 4 straight. Tua, concussion protocol, probably won't play. It's going to be Teddy Bridgewater. Here's some stats in this one, guys. First, you're backing the Dolphins, though, getting points in this one. They're getting a field goal. 57% of the tickets are on the Dolphins. Miami, as I touched on, has lost 4 in a row. Miami's 5-1 against the spread. Their last 6 games against New England. The Pats are 11-2 straight up at home. Their last 13 against Miami. Patriots are also 5 of 6 have gone under in their last 6 games.
Yeah, this is a team. 2 teams going the wrong direction in recent weeks. Miami lost 4 in a row. New England's lost 2 in a row. New England's lost 2 in a row in just dynamic, pathetic fashion of the Sin City miracle of the throwing the ball backwards and allowing the Raiders to win in overtime. And then they're down 22-18 and at the Bengal 5-yard line, and Ramondre Stevenson, who was the starter, the catalyst of the flipping the ball back, fumbles again at the goal line in a game that they could have gone and beat, obviously one of the hottest teams in football in the Bengals. They were down 22-0 in that game, came back, made it all the way to 22-18, so that they were fighting and clawing their way back, but both these teams have just found ways to lose games. Miami specifically had the lead against the Bills in Buffalo, blew it, have a big lead against the Packers at home, blow it. You got to go back to, again, the young coach in his first year. A monster play in that game was Mercedes Lewis, a tight end for the Green Bay Packers, catching the ball at the 4-yard line after about a 40-yard gain, when it clearly looks like he drops the ball and the ball hits the turf and there's no challenge or anything like that, and at a key point in the game. And so you just wonder, these young coaches, just the stuff snowballing and catching up to them. And obviously Belichick, not a young coach, veteran coach, but man, the way the Patriots have lost these games, tough to get back up. And this is one of the uglier games. You talked about Bridgewater going to be starting for Miami. Who's going to outwill each other to try and find their way back into the playoffs here.
As strange as it sounds, though, even with the Pats having those 2 kind of crazy and heartbreaking losses, they're the team of the Pats, Dolphins, and Jets that controls their own destiny to be a wild card team if they can win out.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen the arguing and back and forth on the sidelines with Mac Jones just being uncomfortable with the play calling. Now Stevenson fumbling the football. They've just got to find some semblance to that offense. The defense has been solid and really played a great second half against the Bengals and shutting them down. But they've got to find a way to get something going early in this game so that they don't let those kind of bad thoughts get into their heads early.
Now we're going to jump to our backyard here at Allegiant Stadium, 49ers, Raiders. There's a lot of rumblings here that Derek Carr has played his last game for the Raiders. He's been here for 9 years. He's had some great moments. This was by far the best skill position players around him. Love the way him and Devontae Adams have clicked this year, but of late he has not played well. We've seen a huge line adjustment this morning where the game moved a full 3 points. We hadn't heard anything as filming this that it isn't going to be Carr and they're going to go to Stidham, but something's definitely going on with the Raiders right now. And they're playing against the 49ers, who have the best defense in the league, so it's awfully tough to get on track. San Francisco has won, they're 5-0 their last 5 games against the number. The Raiders have gone 4-1 against the number and straight up their last 5 at home, but an overwhelming 87% of the ticket count, is on the 49ers here. So your offense has really struggled. Carr's thrown a number of interceptions, 3 in the second half against Pittsburgh. Now you're playing against a team that's given up the least amount of points in the NFL. Not exactly the recipe to get better and maybe get a miracle run to get a wild card spot.
Yeah, and falling out of the playoff contention with their loss to the Steelers, making it really, really hard for them to find a way in. Going up against the hottest team in football, the Niners have won 8 in a row under Brock Purdy. Potentially get Deebo Samuel back in this game. George Kittle's been absolutely fantastic, and since they've acquired Christian McCaffrey, they haven't lost a game. So everything's going the way of the Niners, and so much so that with the Eagles, with Hurts being out, the Niners are really the team that's leapfrogged to be the kind of the power rating top of the NFC conference from a divisional standpoint. They've got the biggest point differential at plus 145 in the NFC. They can finish out this season. They most likely can find their way to the number 2 spot if Minnesota who's a dog here, to Green Bay this week. If they find a way to lose that game, the Niners can find a way into the 2 spot and secure home field advantage up until they potentially have to go to Philadelphia.
Yeah, I've really been impressed with the Niners, though. I mean, we talked about it earlier. They manage the game, and Purdy seems to really have found his guy in George Kittle. And with the touchdowns, Kittle's had more touchdowns, I think, since Purdy became the starter than he's had the last 2 years. So you get Samuel back in that offense, you have McCaffrey and that defense, and that's the ingredient that can win a Super Bowl, especially in the NFC right now, as you mentioned with Hurts' injury. And Minnesota I know they're number 2, but you can just tell that they're going to be a bet against in the postseason.
Well, I mean, interesting stat there. Just San Francisco is 11-4, and they have a plus 145 points scored versus points allowed. Philadelphia 13-2, plus 137. Dallas 11-4, plus 131. Minnesota 12-3, and they have a plus 5 point differential. And those are the only 4 teams in the NFC that have a plus point differential. All other 12 teams have a negative point differential. So you can see the imbalance of power there from the NFC teams at the top.
So now we're going to jump to an NFC North game again. Arguably one of the 2 maybe best games of the weekend, and that's the Minnesota Vikings against the Green Bay Packers. We've seen Minnesota have to come back and have a 61-yard field goal to beat the Giants. Come back and beat the Colts after trailing 33-0. Minnesota now, 5 of their last 5 games have all gone over. They're 11-2 straight up, their last 13. Green Bay 18-5 straight up, their last 23 home games. We know how Rodgers plays at home, in Lambeau, in December. It's unbelievable the way that they kind of dominate when they're at home in December and January. Yet, you guys are the small favorite. It's really a balanced kind of betting attack. 51% of the tickets are on the Packers. We're definitely seeing some Viking love here. Vikings beat the Packers. I think it was week 1. Really beat them convincingly earlier in the season. And this is a huge game for both these teams. Packers need to win and still get some help to get in. Vikings are trying to hold on to that number 2 spot. So it's probably one of the 2 best games of the weekend.
Well, you talk about just the excitement of Vikings games. I mean, the likelihood that this game comes down to somebody scoring in the last minute of the game to decide the game. I mean, that's essentially how all Vikings games finish. Obviously, last week with the 61-yarder by Joseph to beat the Giants.
Right.
But they're just kind of hang around real close games. Jefferson really lit up Green Bay the last time they played. I think he had 184 yards receiving in that game. But Aaron Rodgers, you talked about his ability in December and January, and I think LaFleur is now 15-0 in December games.
Pretty impressive.
So not just at Lambeau, but 15-0 with the Packers playing in December, and Scrappy KK busted out the stats for me. Aaron Rodgers in December and January in games that the Packers needed to win.
Right.
They're obviously they've had a couple of late in the year where they don't need to win games, but they're 27-3, or Aaron Rodgers is 27-3 at Lambeau in December and January throughout his career. So, I mean, that's an incredible stat. Minnesota, they're trying to fight for this number 2 spot. But
this game's outdoors.
Yeah,
in the
falling
cold.
to number 3.
Right.
And the Packers, a win here and a win against Detroit next week at home, and they're probably going to find themselves in the playoffs. The only thing stopping that is if the Giants and Commanders can both find ways to win both their games. Commanders have a tough game this week.
All right, so now we're going to jump to Monday Night Football. Schedule makers maybe haven't been great to us of late in prime time, but wow. I mean, when you've got Chiefs, Bengals, Bengals are red hot, hottest team in the AFC right now. We talked about how hot the 49ers are. This is a huge game because if somehow the Bengals are able to win this game against the Bills, I mean, it's going to be crazy of who's going to ultimately get the number 1 seed in the AFC. So a couple of stats here. Total has gone under, though, for Buffalo. 7 of their last 8 road games. Cincy is 5-0 against the number, their last 5. Buffalo is a small favorite, and it is really, as far as ticket count goes, almost an identical 50-50 split in this game, with Buffalo being a very small favorite.
Yeah, and I don't want to pick a side in this game. I think this is an incredible game for Monday night to watch. Cincinnati, arguably the hottest team in the AFC, winning 7 straight. Buffalo sitting at the top, holding on to that number 1 seed that we know that they desperately want to hold on to that number 1 seed and make the AFC roll through Buffalo.
Oh, right.
If they lose this game, they give Kansas City, who's a 14-point favorite against Denver, a chance to go take the number 1 seed. And it actually gives Cincinnati
right,
who has an outside chance of getting the number 1 seed should either of those teams falter. So this is a great lead-up, Week 17, and the guys that are in your fantasy football finals, whether it's Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, a huge total on the board, looking for a scoreboard to be lit up on Monday night. This is one that just looking back to sit back and enjoy and really kind of evaluate where these teams are heading into the playoffs, because this could be another game that we see down the road less than a month from now again.
To me, it's a playoff game. I mean, that's going to be the type of atmosphere that you see in Cincinnati on Monday night. I mean, this game, we talked about, and I think the Viking-Packer game are 2 marquee games this week, are going to be really fun to watch with a lot of playoff implications. There's actually a lot of games on here, guys, to kind of look at. We know these games are all New Year's Day, so don't forget, get signed up for STN Sports. Everyone's going to be recovering from hopefully a fun and safe night the night before. You can just log on and you have everything that we're offering over the counter on the mobile app. We're going to come back and get into a couple of our favorite segments. I can hear John queuing up the music right now. First, it'll be Stephen Money's Fantasy Football Fever, and then our version of the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll be right back on Bookends.
My name's Stephen Money, and here's why you should bet on me, the STN Sports App. Just park at any of our 14 convenient sign-up locations, walk in, and you'll be signed up in minutes. And don't worry, I got all your favorite sports covered. Download the STN Sports App today and trust the local favorite.
Hey everybody, we're back at Red Rocks Racing Sportsbook. Jason, I'm Chucky for our final few segments on the sports betting podcast, Bookends. First, we're going to do our Stephen Money's Fantasy Football Fever. We know it's tough Week 17 because there's so many guys that maybe aren't playing. There's injuries. I think we talked about it last week that if you were in the playoffs and you had Jalen Hurts, it really hurt because who was going to be your quarterback? But we're going to jump in and quarterback. I'm actually going to give you guys 2. I'm going to look at Mike White with the Jets against Seattle. I think with Mike White back and knowing that he is really auditioning for the Jets starting job next year. He's definitely trying to get this team into the playoffs. They've moved on from Zach Wilson. He's going to be inactive the next 2 weeks. He'll be one of those guys that gets dealt prior to the draft or draft day where somebody believes maybe he was the number 2 overall pick. He's got that big arm that they can help develop him into a quarterback. He's not going to be the Jets quarterback, but Mike White can be the Jets quarterback. They've got a great receiving core. I think Mike White has a big game here against Seattle. And the other one I'm going to give you is Trevor Lawrence. I think he's been playing so well right now. We touched on it. They don't want to change anything, Jacksonville, right now. They want to have an impressive win against the Texans where they've struggled and then go into that Week 18 game against Tennessee and just say, hey, we're rolling right now. We're not stopping this momentum train. I think both Mike White and Trevor Lawrence, if you're in your Super Bowl, are good values this week.
Yeah, and as we sit this week, we're talking about teams that are in their Super Bowls or maybe semifinals if your league happens to roll to Week 18. So the likelihood that you're searching for a quarterback is probably not very high. You're likely you had Mahomes, you have Allen, you have Burrow.
I had Hurts.
Maybe you had Hurts, and if you had Hurts, that's really one of the reasons maybe you are looking for a quarterback. Kirk Cousins has been really, really good of late. You talked about Trevor Lawrence as
Jared Goff,
dynamic.
Especially indoors, is a good guy to use.
You know, so you're really, if you're looking for a guy that you're questionable, you don't want to play a Cousins at Green Bay or something like that. You talked about it. That's my quarterback this week is Goff. Playing the Bears, we talked about it earlier. These are two of the worst defenses in the league, so hopefully the Bears can go up and down the field on them. St. Brown can put up some big numbers. Goff has very different splits, home and road.
Right.
I think he's got 20 touchdowns to 3 interceptions at home and like 6 touchdowns and 4 interceptions on the road. So he's done a lot of his damage as a quarterback at home. He's finding the tight end. I think the tight end had 3 touchdowns last week, Shane Zylstra. So Detroit does have the ability to put it up. Goff loves to throw it at home. Hopefully they can catch Swift out of the backfield, maybe not a Williams running touchdown, but the Bears should give him the ability to have a big game. So if you're looking for a sneaky play, maybe it's Lawrence or Goff to try and go steal your fantasy football championship.
And now we're going to jump over to running back. I'm going to go Saquon Barkley for the Giants. Giants are still battling for one of those wild card spots. This is a Colts team that they just looked bad. I mean, to me, the performance on Monday night was they didn't have any emotion. They just weren't good on either side of the ball. Gave up a ton of sacks. I think the Giants here and Saquon Barkley, this numbers continue to go up as well. Is going to go up even higher. I think Barkley has a huge game against the Colts on Sunday. Yeah,
and again, going back to the running back position, the likelihood that Derrick Henry is not going to play this week, and if you have Derrick Henry, you've probably been doing well in fantasy. He's obviously had some big monster weeks. So you're looking for that replacement. I'm going to go to Tyler Algier, the young rookie running back sitting in Atlanta. They play Arizona this week. He's kind of overtaken Cordell Patterson as their lead back, getting 18 to 20 carries. I can see Atlanta and Arizona kind of just wanting to kind of get out of Dodge. Drake London's had some big games. They're looking to develop Ritter, but I think that Algier can get 20 carries here, potentially top that 100-yard century mark, and maybe steal a touchdown for you. So he might be a sleeper to look at.
So there's your running backs. Now we're going to look at wide receivers. And I know I gave you guys Mike White. I'm going to stick with the Jets and go Garrett Wilson. Seattle has given up the 12th most points to wide receivers in fantasy. I think with Mike White back at quarterback right now, I think Garrett Wilson explodes in this game, has a big game. I think White airs it out. I think he throws for over 300 yards against Seattle, has a couple of touchdowns, and I think Garrett Wilson's on the receiving end of a few of those scores.
Yeah, and again, if you're looking for a receiver here, one of my cautions is starting Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill with Bridgewater going in there.
You just like to do the Waddle, right?
Well, I mean, I love Jalen Waddle, and he's won a lot of people, and he's got people in their championships. You just wonder this week at New England, what kind of offense are they going to run under Teddy Bridgewater? Obviously, he's normally not one of those downfield type guys. He's a lot of check down guys, so can those guys have big games? The one guy that I do have full confidence in this week is T. Higgins, and I think this week is a big week for him and the Cincinnati Bengals going up against the Bills, and it's a guy that's going on Monday night, so you can go to that last game of the week to try and steal your championship. And we all know Jamar Chase and the dynamic player that he is, but for some reason in these winter months, we saw it all last year in the playoffs with Cincinnati, and now we've seen it kind of in these cold weather games. He likes going to the big bodied T. Higgins, who gets.
I think he scored a touchdown in 4 straight games.
Yeah, he goes to him, chases the big downfield guy, but the possession guy, those 12, 15-yard routes where T. Higgins kind of bodies off the defender and gets himself in front of him. He's just been that guy. I think he had 9 receptions for 128 last week. So Burrow continues to go after him, and that's why I'm starting T. Higgins with a lot of confidence.
All right, guys, as we talked about, if you're in your Super Bowl or semifinal, hopefully some of these fantasy guys will help you out.
Kickers, check your kickers out. Make sure you know who's kicking indoors, who's kicking in the wind. Don't lose your fantasy football this week on not picking up a kicker that's in a good situation.
Right. So now we're going to jump to our favorite segment. I know I always mention John queuing up the music in the background, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's go good. For me, I'm going to go something I've already touched on, and that's in the NFL. It's the AFC South. It's the Jacksonville Jaguars. I mean, the number 1 overall pick, back-to-back years, a chance to win their division right now. They're playing so well with Trevor Lawrence. I think Doug Peterson's been the perfect fit there after the Urban Meyer failed experiment. I think the good for me is the Jacksonville Jaguars right now, who have a chance to win the AFC South.
Yeah, and I think as we sit here today, they're no doubt the favorite next year to win the South when you talk about getting Calvin Ridley back. That things are going right down there in Jacksonville, and we'll see how they continue to progress and the pieces of the puzzle they add. We've had a football-centric episode here, so I'm going to take my good and go outside of football and go to the NBA. And Luka Doncic, just an absolutely incredible night the other night. First time we ever saw it in NBA history, with 60 points, 21 rebounds, and 10 assists.
Unbelievable.
So the triple-double with 20 rebounds and 60-plus points in an overtime game against the Knicks. And right before Christmas, he had a 50-plus point game. So Luka's playing absolutely incredible for Dallas. And, again, first time in NBA history, and an incredible night for him and the Mavs.
Bad. I'm going to go with the South. And sorry, I know you guys are dealing with bad weather. I don't mean the South in general. I mean the South in pro football. You look at the AFC and NFC South, there's 8 teams total. Guess how many are over 500? None. Absolutely zero. So it's the South right now. I'm not sure why, but you look at Tampa, Carolina, Atlanta, really, struggles. The Saints and the AFC, I know we've talked about Jacksonville, but in Tennessee, but God, the entire divisions in both conferences, the South for me is kind of bad. No team at 500 or above. Well,
you talk about Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars on your good side of things, and they might be the only quarterback. Maybe Ritter in Atlanta, but the rest of all the teams in both these Souths, both from an AFC standpoint and an NFC standpoint, we should see a quarterback change. Literally every team is going to be looking for a new quarterback, and it's just been tough to watch from that standpoint. A lot of losing going on in both these divisions.
So now the ugly, and sorry to pile on you Bronco fans, but OMG. Christmas.
51 points for the Rams.
The Ram offense hadn't scored over 24 points, I think only twice this year. They had 31 at halftime. They scored 51, but really what stood out for me was the last 3 or 4 minutes of the game, all the Broncos did was hand off. I know you're down by a huge number, but hey, you've got a young quarterback in Rippin right now. You've got some young skill position players. Why not continue to try to get a win? Right now, that franchise is in really bad shape. They traded Bradley Chubb at the trade deadline, their best defensive player. They've got Russell Wilson locked up at $250 million on a 5-year deal. I'm not sure what they do, but if you're a Bronco fan right now, it doesn't look good. So for me, the ugly is the Denver Broncos.
Well, and they recognize where they're at, and we've been chattering about it for weeks that they need to let go of Nathaniel Hackett. They need to make some changes there. They're going to keep the GM, but obviously Hackett loses his job, and so they're a big 2-touchdown dog to Kansas City this week, a team that they played tough a couple weeks ago. We'll see if Denver can find a way to do something. And on the other side of that, I'm going to chime in and give you another ugly. Is the same ugly we had last week. I think they were actually our uglier, was this Indianapolis Colts
the
team.
Uglier, I like that.
Who blows a 33-0 lead against Minnesota, now hosts a Monday Night Football game against the Chargers, changes to Nick Foles, and we watch them put up 3 points, get sacked 7 times, and I think throw 3 interceptions. And so things just aren't right in Indianapolis. I don't know that they can get right. They visit the Giants this week, and a Giants team that needs to win this game to get into the playoffs and secure a playoff spot. And so the Colts have just been shameful and really ugly the last several weeks.
One interesting dynamic with the Broncos, and I know you alluded to that the GM is going to stay. However, the GM's duties are going to be changed somewhat. And they're talking about, depending on who the head coach is, that he's got full power of all football decisions. You have to wonder if that's kind of a ploy to maybe lure Sean Payton to that job, giving him full football power and, the power over that roster to make all the moves he has to make. He's been a guy that's been, talked about for the Cowboys. I don't think that happens. The Chargers and maybe the Cardinals. But I think the Broncos, if they want to make a splash right now, the guy is Sean Payton, and maybe that's why they made that decision that the GM is going to take a back seat in some of the football moves to the new coach.
They have to do something. You're not going to be able to move Russell Wilson, so they have to find a way to bring somebody in there that can find a way to have success with him. They do have a very good defense.
And young skill position players. Judy and Sutton and Hamler. You've got a lot of good young wideouts there that it's just it's kind of a head-scratcher why that offense has struggled so much.
Well, Russell Wilson's play has not been good. We used to, let's ride It was always his, let's cook, whatever it wants to be. But it was him scrambling and running the football. And when you watch him in today's game, he just looks like he's lost 2 steps. Not only just 1 step, but he's lost 2 steps in his running game and ability to scramble. He's not able to keep the play alive long enough, and when he used to be able to keep those plays alive and go to a Lockett or a Metcalf, he just doesn't have those type of receivers in Sutton and Judy. They've shown little flashes of it, but they just haven't been what he saw in Seattle.
Yeah, when you looked at him in Seattle, I mean, that kind of that schoolyard play was his MO. He never had a high completion percentage. It was all kind of those kind of broken plays that really made him. But anyway, guys, there's a lot of great games this weekend. Again, great time to get signed up for STN Sports. We want to wish everybody, from both Jason and I to and John, the Red Rock Racing Sportsbook family, everybody at Station Casinos, Happy New Year. Be safe, have fun, and don't forget the app has all the games when you're recovering the next day. So Happy New Year, guys. We'll see you in 2023 on our next segment of the Sports Betting Podcast, Bookends.